welcome to Empire with me, Anita Anand.
And me, William Dalrymple.
So previously, if you're just joining us, and if you've heard this before, it was a very odd story. Okay, so what you have is a situation in China where you have a man called Charles Elliot who is in charge of trade with China, but really not really in charge at all, because the main trade that is going on is the opium trade. And the opium trade is run by this couple of Scottish ruffians called Jardine and Matheson, who pretty much laugh into their sleeves at anything Elliot has to say. He's a weak-chinned Elliot sitting in Macau, who just doesn't really like conflict. He's very conflict averse.
He's a good man. He's a nice
been
man. Freeing slaves in West Africa.
He's a nice man, and he's just not the kind of person to, square up to Jardine and Matheson. And they have these sort of gangs of brigands. They're fully tooled up. They don't really listen to him.
They are the Pablo Escobar of 19th century China. Yeah.
But they're doing it from the British factory in Canton, which is, supposedly sort of British soil, although it isn't, because the Chinese don't let Britain buy the soil that they've put their factory on. It still belongs to China. All the people working in there for the British, boiling their eggs and starching their collars, they're all Chinese. All the guards around it, they're Chinese as well. So it comes in the last episode to a head. Commissioner Lin, who's this one fine, upstanding Chinese mandarin.
Polite, efficient, hardworking.
But made of sterner stuff than Elliot. In many ways like Elliot, sort of quite decent. But in ways unlike Elliot, made of steel. Because he's been sent with this mandate to stop the opium trade. Opium is destroying China and, they've had enough of it. So, despite the fact initially he says, we can maybe legalize this and then maybe we can make the money, we can grow the poppies ourselves, that all gets shot down. And he goes, let's just destroy the opium trade. First of all, let's destroy the buyers, which is, you give people a year to get clean. And if they're still using, you execute them. It's pretty draconian stuff. And then he goes after the suppliers. And the suppliers are all in this sort of British compound, which is, it's cornered the trade. And we got to this point of impasse. It's sort of like high noon at the OK Corral, where he's surrounded, the Jardine and Matheson compound, as it pretty much is now, and said, you hand over all your opium, or we're going to hang these people right in front of your eyes. These are the Chinese that you've been doing business with, who've been getting very, very wealthy off the back of this trade. They're your friends. We will kill them, and then let's see what happens. And Lin then sort of follows this up by writing directly to Queen Victoria saying, look, no, not your fault. And it's not you.
You're an ignorant foreigner.
It's not you.
You don't know.
It's them. But you know what? We're not having this, and consider this a warning. This is the end of that. We're drawing a line. And it all starts ratcheting up until Elliot rides in to the rescue, a decent man, but somehow manages to carry this off where he says, you know what? Just hand in all of your opium, okay, all of it, and the British Crown will pay for it. He hasn't asked anybody. He hasn't
There's
conferred.
no idea how much this is all worth.
No waft of this has got to Palmerston or anybody else. And he said, well, we'll just buy it. Just stop it. You'll make your profits. Just stop being silly. Stop being so silly now. We're not going to have a fight. We've got a gunship, but we're not going to use it. That's silly. And so he offers this deal. And we had the reason we laughed so much is because the opportunists around, like the Americans, who've just pretty recently got independence from the British, are sort of very quickly rubbing off their American flags from their crates.
Saying, this is British opium.
This is British opium. Queen
Give this to
Victoria's
Queen
buying.
Victoria.
It is a bill of $10 million
In the early 19th century, add 4 noughts. Yeah.
for any government. This is and especially if you consider that the opium trade is the furnace that is driving the machine of British India. This is all just catastrophic. So that's where we left it, William Dalrymple. Where are we picking up these reins from now?
Charles Elliot has issued this IOU, and now he has to break it to the British government that they're going to have to pay for it.
That is a conversation I would like to have heard, actually. Very much so, yes.
And he writes a letter arguing that failing to pay up could trigger what he calls a commercial convulsion in the Indian trade. And the British view is that although it's morally dubious, the opium trade has been effectively allowed to exist by the Chinese authorities forever, tolerated in reality, if not in law, because they've never done anything about it. And therefore, this sudden and forceful seizure is seen as an unwarranted act. But Ahead of the IOU goes William Jardine. Jardine and Matheson are always the troublemakers in this story. In 1839, William Jardine, realizing now that there's going to be an issue in the repayment because the figures are so much larger than anyone had anticipated, $10 million.
And also that his opium is at the bottom of the sea because, let's not forget Commissioner Lynn has just dumped it all into the ocean and written a nice poem apologising to the water. It's not coming back. He's out of pocket.
And William Jardine hasn't become as rich as he is without being an operator. And he realises at this point what is needed is someone in London lobbying the government. And so in a very sort of modern twist, he actually gets on a boat, goes back to London from China, takes $20,000 with him because Matheson has advised him that what he really needs to do is now start creating propaganda, effectively, in the newspapers.
Oh, cause a ruckus. Get the British people behind you.
Get the Daily Mail of its day out and about. And so he takes $20,000 to London specifically to buy journalists who will get opinion pieces in the newspapers and get everybody working. And the guy who's writing most vociferously is an ex-East India Company hand who's another Scotsman, part of the same group of Scots near
this
Wells.
Scots cabal, man?
And this is a guy called Hugh Hamilton Lindsay, who is one of the Lindsay family from Fife.
Are they related, William? Tell us
Well,
now.
I hate to say so, yes.
Oh, bloody hell.
And are always getting caught up in situations with my family. For example, there was a James Lindsay who ended up in Tipu's prison with various ancestors of mine in another sort of tight corner. Anyway, Hugh Hamilton Lindsay is basically, at this point in the story, William Jardine's sort of PR man, his PR agent in London. And he starts writing all these opinion pieces in the Times and in other English newspapers, arguing that, and here's a quote, that a despotic and arbitrary government that had always been unjust and oppressive in their treatment of foreigners had deprived innocent Britons of their liberty, debarred them from food and water, threatened their lives. Dearly will they pay for the insults and outrages offered to the British nation. So that's really throwing the kind of...
I mean, it hits all the buttons, doesn't it? Absolutely, it does.
A very modern tabloidy piece. And Jardine's paying for this. He's got a war chest, which he's paying like some sort of Tory donor, pulling out Brexit editorials just at the moment that it's needed, or founding some dodgy right-wing radio station or TV station to throw out this propaganda. It works because listening to all this, and very much of the same temperament, is this character, Lord Palmerston. He is the ultimate sort of British bulldog of the early 19th century.
Well, he's one of those Anglo-Irish peers, a viscount, so he's sort of very blue-blooded. The Temple family is his family, so they've got power and they've got influence. And he begins his parliamentary career as a Tory MP in 1807. And he's held some really high offices as well. He's a very grand man. He's a man with a great sense of his own importance, and he has been Junior Lord of the Admiralty. He served as Secretary of War. He's a big deal. He switches allegiances, interestingly. I do know a bit about Palmerston because he just flips over to the Whigs in 1830. And as a reward, if you like, for flipping parties, he is made Foreign Secretary in 1839. So, his ascendancy is swift and considerable.
He is a great defender of British, as he sees it, defender of British rights, defender of British interests. Any British citizen should be able to claim that, like a Roman citizen once had, that he could just step out. And therefore, he is exactly the right man for Jardine and Matheson to home in on. Soon enough, after being turned down on the first few requests, William Jardine is in his study, feeding him all this directly. And advising him what to do. And what Jardine and Matheson want is they want a full-scale war. They want to send gunboats, they want to send a fleet to China, and they tell Palmerston that it'd be a very easy thing. They have this very dim view of the Chinese. They're saying that it will take absolutely nothing.
It'll be over by Christmas.
It'll be over by Christmas. There will be no effective response from the Chinese. And we can have the right to sell what we like, where we can open up all the ports. We can grab a few territories. We could get that island Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And he's feeding all this Palmerston, who is absolutely a ready...
Lapping it up.
Lapping it up. Also in Jardine and Matheson's favour is the cabinet at this point. Among the people there is our old enemy Macaulay, who we last met in the Irish famine episode of the Irish series. If you remember, Macaulay's brother-in-law, Charles Trevelyan, was the man responsible for not sending aid to the starving Irish. And Macaulay also is exactly the sort of person who loves beating up some natives as he sees it, extending British influence and showing the power of the British. So Jardine and Matheson, who want a war, find they've got a cabinet who, in part at least, is very much on their side. And they feed this line to Palmerston and his fellow hawks that a little show of force, you don't even need to send a huge fleet, a little show of force will make the Chinese back down, and that they will provide all the ports, all the facilities that we need. We can get opium legalized once and for all, get this trade going again, and recover the money. Otherwise, he says, where are you going to get this 10 million from?
What are you going to do? Yeah, we're still on the hook for 10 million. Yeah. Even
for a government at the peak of British power, this is not a sum that's easy to just whip out of the budget.
So, I mean, this has a phrase that we've all come to know now, and I wonder if the origins are from this conflict, which is gunship diplomacy, which is where you put your biggest cannons and your biggest guns around, and then you say, you know what, let's talk now.
This is absolutely Palmerston's modus vivendi. He is Mr. Gunship.
You know, Jardine, I mean, clever man, though, to sort of buy off editors and start getting this stuff seeded. And also, presumably, to give a wholly inaccurate account of, you know, sort of men starving to death in whatever the Chinese version of the Black Hole of Calcutta is. I mean, he will paint a picture, won't he? If they didn't get food, they didn't get water. And you were saying, you know, chickens were coming regularly over the back.
Chickens were coming in, pigs, everything was being let in the back quietly, yeah.
They just didn't know how to cook it as well as their Chinese cooks. And, you know, they had to pull up their own stockings. But we weren't in a starvation situation, but that is the imagery that he has come with. And that's what's inflamed the people. And then given already a hawkish Palmerston his casus belli, or at least casus gunship diplomacy whatever that is in Latin.
Now, there are a few voices against this, because even in the early 19th century, even at the height of British imperialism, there are many people in Britain who regard the opium trade as an abomination. And among those arguing that the British have got no right at all to demand compensation is our old friend George Staunton. Do you remember George Staunton from
Staunton.
The embassy story, the Macartney embassy? So this is young George Staunton, who'd been trying to speak perfect Chinese at the age of 11.
He was learning it. Yes, that's right. They took him on as he was a translator who may have over-egged his CV a little bit about just how much he knew. Now little George has grown up into big George Staunton, and he's saying, no, this is not, I don't recognise this.
And he's an MP. He's apparently the worst speaker in Parliament. He can't get his words out at all any better than he could do with the Chinese emperor. He's no better on the floor of the House. But he is regarded as the great Chinese expert. He's the only person in Parliament who's been to China, and he speaks Chinese, and by this stage probably
now he does.
Went back to work in the factory. Now he does, yeah. He is very clear that the British have no right to ask for this compensation. There are others who are arguing that the opium trade is an abomination, which the British cannot go to war to defend an illegal trade with a drug that poisons the people. There's also a whole group of people in Parliament and the Cabinet who point out the financial costs and the risks of the war, that this is the largest empire in the world. Remember that at this point, the British are having a very uphill struggle in Afghanistan. It hasn't yet turned into the catastrophe it will do in 1842 when an entire British army is lost retreating from Kabul. But it's already been clear that by the end of 1839 that it's going to be an expensive and difficult thing to hold. And it's not the moment to start sending more fleets to other ends of the world in more dubious missions. Then there's a whole group of people in Parliament that point out that, there's a perfectly peaceful resolution possible. We don't need to start sending war fleets to literally the other end of the world in order to negotiate with a people who many people in Europe regard as a model state, which has kept a the largest empire in the world for many, many centuries.
Yeah, I mean, just pause there, just to remind people, just before you carry on, because there are two narratives about China, and we talked about this at the beginning of this series. The one, which is, comes out from the 1700s onwards, where the tastes for Chinese goods, chinoiserie, and you have, people writing like Voltaire, writing about what civilized people these are, the absolute height of civilization. They're really, people we need to emulate. And then you've got the Jardine and Matheson version, which becomes all pervasive, that these guys are, they're less than us. They're savages, really. They don't know how to run their own country. They're all corrupt. They're all venal. And it is the struggle of these two ideologies. So it is almost like newspeak, which is forget all that you thought about the Chinese, everything that you've ever said about the Chinese, Great Britain. I know you've liked them in the past, but that's not what the imagery is. So it really is a very contemporary picture. This is a propaganda war that's going on about China.
And we should say that one of the people who's very active at this point in Parliament against a British intervention is William Gladstone, who we've also met behaving very well, uniquely, with the Irish in a period when the British behaved very badly to the Irish and trampled on their rights. Gladstone was a voice of moderation. And here he is again now in Parliament. And he makes these fantastic speeches. He says, "I'm in dread of the judgments of God upon England for our national iniquity towards China." And he's very clear. The British are poisoning the Chinese people. This is an unjust war. There is absolutely no reason. But he's not in power. Palmerston is.
Palmerston is in power. He's also a better speaker than George Staunton, to be fair, and people listen to Gladstone generally.
Exactly.
People don't sort of nod off or go to the loo when he's speaking. But the wind is not behind him. It is behind Palmerston.
Exactly. So egged on by Jardine and Matheson, particularly Jardine, who's now actually got access, sort of Elon Musk-like, into the study of power, the equivalent of the Oval Office. And in August 1839, it goes to the cabinet. What are we actually going to do? Can we just repay these traders with our own money? And of course, the Prime Minister doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to go to the people and tell them that he's paying $10 million for some illegal opium, that you can't sell that to the electorate.
Can't sell it to anyone. It's at the bottom of the ocean. It's not going to be sold to anyone in particular.
And Palmerston, characteristically, favours a forceful response to protect British interests. He says it's not about the opium, this is about British honour. But he plays that card. He says, in the language of Hawkes at all periods of history, that the Chinese need to be taught a lesson and they need to pay for the destroyed opium. And there's a little bit of disagreement in the cabinet, but Macaulay comes to Palmerston's aid. He's the young kid in the block. He's just his first time in the cabinet. He's just got in there, and he immediately clings to Palmerston and encourages the war. And so the settlement, the compromise, is that they will send a naval squadron, but it will be of limited size. So they're going to send a small squadron in order to obtain reparations from China for Commissioner Lynn's bad treatment of Charles Elliot and other British subjects. That's how it's been framed.
And also there's a quote from Palmerston. The way Palmerston reads this is obviously through the filter of Jardine. He says, talking about Commissioner Lynn, he says he refused to grant Elliot the power necessary to control the British subjects within the dominions of China. Just break that down for a second. So Elliot did have the power. No one listened to him, first of all. And the second, within the dominions of China. He's saying the Chinese authority have no right to say anything within their own dominion. It's a real sea change in foreign policy, and it is going to grate against a lot of people. Nevertheless, the ships are on their way. How many ships? I mean, what are we talking about? What's sent out here?
The decision made is that because there's opposition in Parliament, they're not going to send a massive fleet, but they're going to send a small squadron. And among the vessels that are going to be sent is the world's very first all-iron war steamer, which is called the Nemesis. And no one's ever seen a ship like this before. This is what's the equivalent today, a kind of stealth bomber or something. It's a completely new generation of warship. And remember that at this point, the Chinese have just got wooden junks. And so you've got this sort of sinister vessel that the Chinese call the Devil Ship, which they're putting into action. It's the latest technology. And the hope is, in the brief discussion that is given to this matter in Parliament, that sending a limited naval squadron will be enough to put enough pressure on to get the money out of the Chinese and repay the British government for all the opium that's been taken. they also realised that they can call in troops from India.
India's not that far away. I was just thinking, Elliot's family member, he's not far away. He can dispatch, and they've got lots of people in India.
Exactly. So the order is sent to the government of India to support this squadron with East India Company forces. So we suddenly find lots of Sikhs, lots of Punjabis being added to this force. The manpower is Indian. The fleets are from England. And they make this decision in just 3/4 of an hour. And they all pat each other on the back.
Well, there's some really appalling things. They're sort of jokily talking to each other about this, clearly not taking this very seriously, or so convinced of, the turning up of the Targaryen dragon at the gates that everything's going to cave in just at the sight of the nemesis. They sort of are saying to each other, we have just made war on the master of 1/3 of the whole human race.
So there is this nervousness.
Yeah.
They've already seen that Afghanistan is putting up a much greater resistance than they had planned, and now they're taking on something far greater than Afghanistan, this enormous empire in China, and they've never made war on China before. They don't know what Chinese troops are going to be like. It's like playing a football match with a team that you have no knowledge of, and this is 1/3 of the human race, an empire the size of Europe. But the decision is made, and because they've given the whole day for discussing this, imagining that it might be such a contentious issue that they would be debating into the night. But it's over by about 3 p.m, and Lord Broughton decides that it's a nice day, so he goes off for a 2-hour horseback ride with Queen Victoria through Windsor Park to tell her the latest update on this small crisis.
Right.
The rain comes and closes play on their ride, but the decision is made. Gladstone is furious when he hears this. In the next debate in Parliament, he states that a war more unjust in its origin, a war more calculated in its progress to cover this country with permanent disgrace, I do not know of and have never read of.
Let's take a break. Join us after the break where we find out what happens when the nemesis reaches Chinese waters. Welcome back. Okay, so the Nemesis, this ironclad gunship, the people have never seen the like of before, the devil ship, is in Chinese water. What is going on the Chinese side? At what point do they know that this is what the British Parliament has decided with the blessing, it would seem, of the Queen, to just take off and it's a declaration of war. They must have seen it as that, or what do they think?
It is a declaration of war. But they're not at all worried, as they've seen it, or certainly as Commissioner Lin sees it.
Those guys in the factory weren't much to worry about. Yeah,
they've caved in over 5 days. That they are barbarians from the other side of the world. We have no need of their manufacturers. They have need of us. And so Commissioner Lin thinks that that we've got to be very nice to these foreigners. We've showed them their place. And then he writes a private dispatch to the emperor. And it's very interesting what he says. He basically says there's absolutely nothing to worry about. After I arrived in Canton, I investigated the feelings of the foreigners. On the outside, they seem intractable, but inside, they are cowardly. If in future we fear them setting off border provocations, the ulcer of trouble they bring will grow day by day. They are in the minority, and we must not forget we are the majority. Though their ships are strong and their guns quick, they can be only victorious at sea. They cannot play their tricks in the port, and Guangdong, Canton, is well fortified. Although there have been some ups and downs so far, the situation as a whole is under control. And he writes that those that went on smuggling were courting destruction, and that they could easily be destroyed by the fire rafts and the militia that he's hired from the local fishing populations. He's saying we don't even need to send troops from the centre, just the local militia will do. And then he writes another letter on the 1st September. He doubles down on his idea that the British are absolutely nothing to be feared. He says, despite their guns, the foreign soldiers are not skilled at infantry engagements. And then he gives his reasoning. Their legs and feet, he says, are closely bound by tight trousers, which makes bending and stretching inconvenient. when they reach the shore, they are thus powerless, and their strength can easily be controlled.
Well, see, until this point, I thought Lin was, an intelligent man, but he sounds like an idiot. He just doesn't understand, does he? That actually, when it comes to naval prowess, the Brits have a reputation, quite rightfully. They have India. There are mobilisable troops not very far from where you are. He's completely underestimated the situation.
He's not clever. He is brought up in a system which has always regarded China as the centre of the world, the centre of civilization, and that foreigners are barbarians who have got to be humoured but must not be allowed to get above themselves. And he has literally no conception of the power of mid-19th century Victorian weaponry. He doesn't realise that the wooden junks, the bows and arrows, the spears, and this is a very tragic story which is now unravelling, because you have these characters who've done, behaved extremely honourably by their own lights. They've stopped gangsters. They've stopped a terrible poison which is eating into their society. And with tact, as they see it, and with good manners, they've made the foreigners behave themselves and won.
I see that, but can I just also point out, this is a country then, and a Chinese government with spectacularly bad intel. I mean, honestly, spectacularly bad. Because 3 times Lin gets news that there is a flotilla heading in his direction, that this is serious, and 3 times he just kind of wafts it off like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry. He keeps telling the emperor, don't worry about it. In fact, he keeps saying, when they can almost see them on the horizon, it's like, it is not a rumour. They're actually coming. They are coming. They are nearly here. It's an opium smuggling flotilla. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it with our burning rafts. We can make short shrift of this. He doesn't recognise it at all for what it is, which is tragic, you say, but also just, sort of diplomatically daft. If you are that isolated, you don't see the problems on the horizon.
I mean, you're right. Of course you're right. But you've got to remember that the Manchus had a terrific military reputation. They just conquered great chunks of Western China. They conquered
land.
Tibet. Yes, but they in their eyes, they were the supreme warriors of the world. They had no conception of how far they'd fallen behind in terms of technology.
Yeah.
And nothing they've seen so far of the British leads them to believe that they're anything to worry about. What unfolds is a series of complete miscalculations by the Qing court. And that begins now to unfold. So at 9 a.m. on the 4th September, 1839, the first 3 small ships of the fleet come. They take on the Qing junks at Kowloon that are blocking British access to fresh food and water in the factories. They still haven't completely let up the siege.
Right.
And off the mainland, Elliot has got his interpreter, Karl Gutzlav, and he tries to hand letters to the captains of the war junks, telling them that if they did not withdraw, violence would result. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese captains simply refuse to take the letters. They won't open the letters, they won't read them, on the grounds that they weren't empowered to do so. So at 2 p.m. on the 4th September 1839, with the Cantonese sun blazing down, Elliot says that if they did not allow them to get provisions in half an hour, he would open fire. And when the deadline came, Elliot stuck to his word. And slightly to everyone's consternation, the junks did not flee, but very bravely stood their ground and returned fire. And at 4:45, as the junks drew alongside the English ships, Elliot writes, "We gave them 3 such broadsides that it made every rope in the vessel grin again. We loaded with grape the 4th time and gave them gun for gun. The shrieking on board was dreadful, but it did not frighten me. This is the first day I ever shed human blood, and I hope it will be the last." So already there's this awareness among the Brits that, if they do fight with the Chinese, the result is always a massacre.
Okay.
That they're not equal, a fair fight, so to speak.
Can I ask you this? Is a full-blown war at this point inevitable, or is there a way back from that?
Well, it is inevitable in the sense that the Chinese don't realise what's coming, and therefore are in absolutely no mind to back down.
But Elliot wants a compromise. Elliot's a man who compromises. He's not doing this, opening fire, thinking, actually, I'm starting a war. He's thinking, I mean, with an Elliot brain, there must be a way to row back from this.
Correct. And he hopes very much that they will row back. But the fleet is now on its way. The first ships have arrived. Commissioner Lin is sticking to his original position that the British are welcome to come and trade in Canton, but anyone who wants to come will have to sign a bond promising not to trade in opium forever.
It's not unreasonable. It isn't
Not
unreasonable at all. You know, stop pumping drugs into our country. That's all we're saying. You can come in, stop firing at us. We don't need all this silliness. Just stop, poisoning us with your drugs.
So again, on the 2nd of November, you have another confrontation between the Qing war junks and these ironclad British ships. And the English warship, the Hyacinth, begins cannonading, and the Chinese admiral again bravely returns fire, standing erect before the mast, wielding his sword and roaring, "Death to deserters!" He does not flinch, even when injured by a cannonball that also took off one of his main masts. Elliot has to write these letters back to England saying, "We ran down the Chinese line, pouring in a destructive fire, the terrible effect of which was soon manifest. One war junk blew up at about a pistol shot distance, 3 others were sunk, several others obviously waterlogged. The Admiral's conduct was worthy of his station, manifesting a resolution of behaviour honourably enhanced by the hopelessness of his efforts." So this is not a nice war to be involved in if you're Elliot, because these guys effectively can't fire back.
Well, you're just mowing down human people.
You're mowing down men who are honourably sticking to their station, but have absolutely no chance of sustaining even a small response to what's going on. After these 2 engagements, when you've had 2 episodes of British ships just instantly sinking, massacring Chinese naval forces, still the Chinese don't understand that the Qing ships cannot win this war against the fleet once it arrives. And when the full fleet turns up, which is the following July, with the Nemesis, they have Palmerston's battle plan, which has basically been knocked up in his office with William Jardine. And William Jardine is sitting in London. He's got access now to the Foreign Office. He's walking into Palmerston's studies, one of very few people in London that's been to China, that knows the landscape, and Palmerston is lapping up all that he wants.
Palmerston trusts him. He thinks he's a reliable source.
It couldn't happen today. Imagine a businessman with a dodgy reputation walking into the most powerful office of the land.
That somebody, with a huge business interest in a certain field could come in and whisper sweet nothings into a powerful man's ear. No, it wouldn't happen.
We have luckily moved on a long way from that. Exactly.
Ancient history.
But that is exactly what's going on. And so the battle fleet arrives, and it has to be said, a very efficient and effective battle plan, which has basically been given to Palmerston, already written by William Jardine. And what they said they should do is that they should bypass Canton, that they shouldn't go straight to Canton, which is where all the action has been so far, but instead they should go for the jugular, go for the Empire's centre of food distribution on the southeast coast, the point at which the capital's grain supply set off, which is Nanjing, on the Grand Canal, and then sail up, if there's any more resistance, up to Beijing. They're not messing around with Canton, they're going straight for the capital.
I don't think we said how many are in the British fleet, because we're talking about sort of 22 warships, 27 transports, 3,600 Scottish, Irish and Indian infantrymen. I mean, this is a considerable force. This is not messing about at all.
It's not a fleet, but it's a flotilla. Yeah.
A flotilla, okay.
It's a flotilla. And their first point is to control the island of Zhoushan, which controls the entrance to the river. So on the 4th July, battle begins, and the 22 warships, which is quite a lot of warships.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And on the morning of the 4th July, they approach Zhoushan Island. And by 8 in the morning, all is as ready as it's ever going to be. There's 15 British ships lined up opposite these poor, unfortunate Qing war junks. And the British, again, keep hoping that the Chinese will just buckle and having seen what happened last time.
Yeah, look what we can do. We can do. Back down.
So there's this standoff between 8:30 in the morning, when the British fleet lines up opposite these junks, and they hold their fire until 2:30 in the afternoon, hoping the Chinese will reconsider the offer they've made of unconditional surrender. But of course, the Chinese are not going to do that. And so then Lord Jocelyn, who is Eliot's military secretary, writes in his diary what happens. The broadsides begin. The broadside, for those who don't know, is one side of a ship firing all its cannons.
Where all the portholes are.
Where the portholes are. As before, there is just a massacre. This is what he writes. The crashing of timber, falling houses, and the groans of men resounded from the shore. When the smoke cleared away, a mass of ruin presented itself to the eye. Crowds were visible in the distance, flying in all directions. The British had fired for only 9 minutes, but when they landed on the shore, they just found dead bodies, bows and arrows, broken spears and guns. And then there's one small settlement on this island, which is called Dingai. The Madras Regiment is given the task of taking it. It trains 4 guns on it. By 10 o'clock that evening, the inhabitants just run away. The governor drowns himself in a small pool. And this is another thing that happens continually in this story, and we'll see it again and again. This habit of ritual suicide in the face of humiliation. And so when the British do go into Canton, they find that half the citizens just commit suicide. And they walk into this massacre scene of people that have killed themselves. So the British flag by the following morning is fluttering over the city walls, but nearly 1 million people have fled the island. Half-smoked pipes, cups of untasted tea, abandoned pots. Just 9 minutes of fire has seen 1 million people flee. And the grotesque discrepancy in the strength between the British and the Qing forces is replayed again and again.
Can I just say, I mean, that kind of massacre, that kind of overpowering strength, it's not a fight. If you are a fighting man and you see you're just mowing down, people who are largely defenseless but brave, but defenseless, there is, a body of writing from British officers who took part in this that shows the sort of self-disgust at what, pounding and broadside after broadside against wooden junks that just splinter. Can I read a bit from one of them? So this is one description of a British officer involved in that. He says, the sea is a scene of horror, quite blackened with floating corpses after a battle. The inside of a fort, he says, is bespattered with brains. Another confesses in his journal that many most barbarous things occurred that are disgraceful to our men. So, they're not filled with honour. These are honourable men. They're going to fight a cause. And when they see what they're basically facing floating matchboxes in comparison, that's not sport. That's a massacre. And so they don't feel terribly proud of themselves either.
It's quite telling that the only single victory in the entire course of the war, which we're going to hear about next episode, is when there's one minor skirmish and the people who defeat the British is a village of angry peasants with pitchforks who've had their fields overrun. It's not the Qing army. The Qing army is instantly so demoralized by what's happening and knowing that there's no way that they can touch these invaders, that the officers, in almost all cases, start locking the gates of their forts so that the soldiers won't run away.
Wow. Well, there's so much more to talk about. Till the next time we meet, it is goodbye from me, Anita Anand.
A goodbye from me, William Dalrymple.